Um, the autopilot, the expectation is that someone is paying attention to the road and is ready to take over if there is an issue. It's really intended in the same way that autopilot for an aircraft works, where autopilot for an aircraft alleviates pilot workload, but the pilot is still expected to pay attention, and so you can't like turn on the autopilot and go to sleep. And that is certainly true of the autopilot that we'll have. In the long term, there will be a failed operational autopilot with redundant sensors and everything that's needed for someone to actually literally go to sleep and wake up at their destination. But this is an extremely difficult engineering project. And it means you have to take care of all of the corner cases, and there are many corner cases. The real question for autopilot is not is it going to work? Is it going to work? But how many nines of reliability? And how much safer does it need to be than a person driving before the autopilot can take control with no attention from a person? So I think probably we'd want autopilot to be at least statistically 10 times safer than a person before we would suggest that someone simply turn on autopilot and wake up at their destination. And then as far as vehicle-to-vehicle communication, there is a little bit of that will be done in terms of figuring out, say, traffic data, like traffic speed data, so we can do better navigation over time. So we can say, okay, how fast our Model S is going on this road, and that gives us the ability to give better navigation to users. I'm actually testing several builds of the auto steer functionality every week. Yeah, okay. And so there's we make sort of improvements. Most weeks it gets better, some weeks it gets worse. And it's a bit tricky because when you do this is a very difficult thing to take over steering, and we have to also consider what happens if there's a hardware problem, if some hardware system fails in the vehicle, or there's a CAN bus communication error, or there's just the debugging of a huge range of issues is very difficult. But there's only one computer. In fact, there's a whole bunch of computers in series that are doing this. So if any one of those computers fails, then the auto steer functionality would fail. There's no issue with the government. Awesome. because importantly, this is not an abdication of responsibility for steering. Yeah. It is simply meant as a driver assistance feature. Yeah. So like I said, it's a lot like autopilot for aircraft, where a pilot still has responsibility for flying the plane, but being able to engage autopilot just reduces the pilot's workload substantially. Now, it will take some period of time for regulators to accept that it's okay to just go to sleep in the car. After it's shown to work, and we can compile a great deal of evidence statistically to compare what the computer would have done versus a person over billions of miles, and we can show within a very high confidence interval that it's cool for the computer to drive you home. It might vary by country and by state within various countries, but it is interesting. Like what I've found, with both narrow and deep AI, is that with each passing year, my estimate for when it happens gets closer. This is, both interesting and alarming. Like it's exciting and alarming. So.